Hello, this is Petra, Executive Committee member of the Club of Rome and founder and Executive Director of the Collective Leadership Institute. And what really excites me is to look at the connections between Corona crisis, the climate change and digitalization, and how this impacts on our ability to actually embrace uncertainty and bring in new perspectives. I do believe our future needs collective leadership. And what is so interesting, that if we look at the lens of co-evolutionary change, there is a strange connection between the climate emergency, the corona crisis, and digitalization. All three bring us to ask new questions about the co-evolutionary dynamics of change, about the role of human agency, and about what is so important for collective stewardship, about networked transformative change and how we organize this. So what is interesting is that all these three features, and digitalization is not necessarily seen as a crisis at the moment. It really helps us to connect. But if we don't steer it in the right direction, it can become a crisis. So all three elements are the result of a human footprint that begins to alter socioecological systems. And we tend to call this a new era, the era of the Anthropocene, in which the feedback interactions between human systems and planetary processes are actually pushing systems out of balance. And Corona is the most obvious that we all experience at the moment. The climate emergency is another one that some of us really, really feel and experience, but others tend to ignore. And all of them remind us that humankind is actually globally connected and that we are vulnerable, that we need to reconnect hearts and minds, or how I say, intuition and rationality. And it also helps us to look at these uncertainties in these situations, that we become more conscious and more responsible in our human agency, and that we look at how we do this in networks. So what has taken us into this situation as we are today? There are many explanations, and this is cutting a long story short, but this is at the core of looking at the world. The machine mindset has led us to a distorted worldview of planet Earth as a disenchanted machine, which we try to control, and it doesn't really work, and which we may or may not able to repair. And if we look at transformations of the future, we need to completely shift that mindset into an aliveness mindset. So that means we see the planet as a living system in which belonging, identity for human beings, but also other beings, and what it means to feel alive is actually guiding our behavior. And nobody has said this so nicely as Joanna Macy. She said, if the world is to be healed through human effort, and that is what we need to do, I am convinced it will be people whose love for this life is even greater than their fear of the future. So it is so interesting. There is a long chain of people who actually promote that change in perspective, who promote an aliveness mindset. And they have been generally ignored, I would say. At least they're not mainstream. And beyond Joanna Macy, it is, for example, Elizabeth Sahtouris, who wrote a lot about us being part of a complex nested system. Margaret Whitley, who says relationality in life is so crucially important, and we haven't yet begun to understand what this means and what we could learn from that. Or Andreas Weber, who says life is actually intentional. Life wants more life. So everybody wants to be alive, not only human beings, but plants and trees and animals and everything. And also the late Jane Jacobs, an architect, who says there are so many similarities between life processes and economic development that have been quite a lot ignored. And Christopher Alexander, another architect, very interesting writing, who speaks about the pattern, the relational pattern that in a space that actually co-create a feeling of harmony, and that determine the degree of aliveness in a particular created space. or Janine Benyus, who's known for her biomimicry approach, who would be asking, what can we actually learn from nature about everyday inventing? Or Evelyn Fox-Keller, who says love, power and insight and science belong together. So it's not just rationality that's going to take us into a scientific future. Or the late Janella Meadows, who says we can't control systems, although she's a systems modeler or was a systems modeler. We need to dance with these systems. Or James Lovelock, who actually developed the Gaia theory and says the planet is an integrated whole. Or the late Polly Higgins, who is known for her fight against ecocide and says unlimited growth is actually the cause of ecocide. And there are so many more people who have been writing books and people who are known, academics and non-academics, that actually promote an aliveness mindset. So the issue is the future requires us to play a role in putting this aliveness mindset center stage. So it is about understanding what gives life to systems, natural systems, social systems, economic systems, and it's paramount in order to overcome the crisis that we have in the climate emergency and in the corona pandemic, but also to humanize digitalization and work towards well-being of people and well-being of the planet. I've been writing a lot about this in a report to the Club of Rome in the year 2019 with the title Steering Sustainability Transformations. And what I defined and brought in is to say we need to start talking about systems aliveness. And it is the capability of small and larger systems to gain resilience, to regenerate, so that they can maintain their vitality and mutual consistency in collaboration and in interaction with other systems. So what does it mean for us personally? And that is so interesting because we need to connect that to our personal level. So have you ever felt just at ease by sitting in a beautiful place like this lake? It's close to my home. And honestly, these are two deer who actually went for a swim. You can't believe it, but they did it. And so that's something nourishing our energy. Or have you ever entered a building, this is the Sistine Chapel, and felt awfully overwhelmed by the uplifting energy of the space? Or have you ever been just close to people and felt, this is really nourishing my energy? We feel this so much at the moment with the corona pandemic and the lockdowns, where we miss that human energy and the listening to each other that Skype and Zoom and telephone cannot really substitute for. Or have you ever felt the joy of being part of a positive change, a forceful change? So where you felt energized, being in a team, doing something together, organizing, initiating something, and really felt this is like feeling alive. So it is so interesting, understanding what gives life to us personally, guides us into understanding what gives life to social ecological systems. So this must become a guiding force for approaching the large systems change that we so desperately need. And all we need to do is we need to learn to collectively steward that systems aliveness from smaller to larger systems. So that is the core task, that we learn to steward conditions for this very relational, interwoven social, economic and ecological patterns that enhance aliveness in ourselves, in our teams, families, communities, cities, organizations, societies, and the global system. So that means we need to be with each other in a different way and work with each other in a different way. And we need to collaborate much more and generate the fun that actually a good collaboration can bring. So what would this mean to bring this aliveness mindset into the way we work with each other? So some of you may know I developed the Collective Leadership Compass, which is a kind of meta guidance on creating aliveness in systems, in small systems, within a person, in collaboratives, but also in large systems change. But if we take that on the collaborative level, then the big question is, if we really want to have a quality collaboration, we need to ask, what will we do that invigorates people to shape the future collectively? And who needs to be part of that collaboration ecosystem that we need to build? How do we engage people? How do we engage their hearts and minds, their visions? And how do we appreciate what already exists in terms of innovative approaches and take that on instead of doing something completely competitive? And how do we touch people's hearts and minds and create meaning? And how do we leverage diverse perspectives and competencies and expertise so that we can get out of competition into collaboration? And how do we contribute to a larger story and deliver our complementary contributions to whatever we want to do, to rescue, to maintain, to change? So the result of finding responses to these questions is aliveness in human collaboration systems. And whoever wants to kind of have a little bit more a look into this, there is a free access online tool available that you see up there, and it probably can be noted down. So check it out. It's all there and it's freely available, and it helps people to improve the quality of collaboration and bring aliveness into collaboration. But what does this mean? On a larger scale, what does an aliveness mindset require when we want to organize our societies? I believe we need to strengthen and align our approaches to steward aliveness at all levels of our societies, and we need to do those collectively. That is extremely important. So again, around the collective leadership compass, you can create responses to fundamental questions that give you a gateway into a roadmap into systems aliveness. So the first question is, how do we embed narratives of care and human and planetary well-being in our economic paradigms and also in our societal institutions? Because that is a quite an interesting impact that Corona at the moment has. These questions are really being asked, but we need to kind of expand on these questions and think about that. What are future narratives, aliveness mindset narratives that help us in a different future? And how to strengthen global societal structures that empower people to contribute to thriving economic activities. So what's the purpose of business, and how can businesses contribute to societal wealth in the sense of well-being and not in the sense of the wealth of just a few and not the others? And in terms of innovation, how can we foster technological, social and digital and scientific innovation in a way that helps us into aliveness, into thrivability, and nurtures life support system? I believe there is a lot to learn also for digitalization from forests and their communicative interconnection and how they actually mutually support each other and help each other, which digitalization so far does to a certain extent, but in other ways it does the opposite. And we need to ask, how do we measure societal progress and economic results in relation to the collective value for people and planet? At the moment, we're measuring mainly GDP. And so we're measuring something that takes us into more and more crises, because what gets measured gets improved. And so we're improving the wrong thing. We're improving only the growth strategy and measure not what is really, really important for societal and planetary well-being. So, and we also need to look at co-constructing enlivening participatory governance mechanisms. Democracy is a good way and it needs to be improved. We need to have governance mechanisms at many levels for common good issues, for sustainable value chains, for water management, etc. And we need to strengthen our regulations and further our resource allocations, create incentives for resource allocations that safeguard human well-being and the planetary life support system. So in that way, we need collective stewardship. It is an aliveness mindset. It is the proactive and the collaborative engagement for a thriving future by many complementary actors. And it honors the world as an interconnected system. And most of all, we need to anchor that collective stewardship in a responsibility for safeguarding planetary and human well-being at all levels of our global society. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention.